LETTER the 32nd of Life in Mexico. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Life in Mexico by Francis Calderon de la Barca. LETTER the 32nd. Leave Atlacamulco. Assemble by starlight. Balmy atmosphere. Flowers and trees of the tropics. The formidable barrancas. Breakfast under the trees. Force of the sun. Miacatlan. Hospitality. Profitable estate. Leave Miacatlan. Beautiful village. Musical bells. Ride by moonlight. Sugar fires. Cocoyotla. Old gentlemen. Supper. Orange trees and cocoas. Delicious water. Sugar estates. A scorpion. Set off for the cave. Morning ride. Dangerous path. Cocoyotla, 5th. On the morning of the 3rd of February we rose about 2:30, and a little after 3, by the light of the stars and the blaze of the sugar fires, our whole party were assembled on horseback in the courtyard. We were about 12 in number. Don Juan, the coffee planter, and Don Pedro, a friend of his, were deputed by the agent to act as our guides. 4 or 5 well-armed mozos, farm servants, were our escort, together with our Mexican boy, and we had mules to carry our luggage, which was compressed into the smallest possible compass. The morning was perfectly enchanting, and the air like balm, when we set off by this uncertain light, not on roads, much to our satisfaction, but through fields and over streams, by hills and down into valleys, climbing among stones, the horses picking their way like goats. I certainly never felt or imagined such an atmosphere. The mere inhaling it was sufficient pleasure. When the light gradually began to dawn, so that we could discern each other's faces, and made sure that we were not a party of shadows, for besides the obscurity, a mixture of sleepiness and placid delight had hitherto kept us all silent, we looked round on the landscape as little by little it assumed form and consistency. The fires from the hacienda were still visible, but growing pale in the beams of morning, vanishing like false visions from before the holy light of truth. As we rode along, we found the scenery on the hilly parts was generally bleak and sterile, the grass dried up, and very little vegetation; but wherever we arrived at a valley sheltered from the sun's rays, there we found a little rivulet trickling through it, with water like liquid diamonds, bathing the trees and the flowers, the loveliest blossoming trees mingled with bananas, oranges, and lemons, and interspersed with bright flowers, forming a natural garden and orchard. One tree, with no leaves on it, is covered with white starry flowers, and looks at a distance as if it had been covered with snow, which had melted off the branches, leaving only occasional white tufts. Another is bending with lilac blossoms, which hang in graceful clusters, another with flowers like yellow balls. Then there are scarlet wild flowers that seem as if they were made of wax or shining coral, and quantities of white jasmine, trailing on the grass and throwing itself over the branches of the trees. There is one beautiful tree with flowers like immense white lilies, and buds that look like shut lily blossoms in white wax. Leaving these beautiful and fertile lands that adorn the slopes and bases of the hills, you mount again up the steep paths, and again you find the grass dried up, and no vegetation but stunted nopals or miserable-looking blue-green magueys. Yet sometimes in the most desert spot, a little sheltered by a projecting hill, you come upon the most beautiful tree bending with rich blossoms, standing all alone, as if through ambition it had deserted its lowly sisters in the valley, and stood in its exalted station, solitary and companionless. As for the names of these tropical trees, they are almost all Indian, and it is only botanically that they can be properly distinguished. There is the floripundio, with white odoriferous flowers hanging like bells from its branches, with large pointed pale green leaves. The yohohoquetel, signifying flower of the heart, like white stars with yellow hearts, which when shut have the form of one, and the fragrance of which is delicious. The ihuhoquetel, whose flowers look like small white musk roses. Another with a long Indian name, and which means the flower of the raven, and is white, red, and yellow. The Indians use it to adorn their altars, and it is very fragrant as well as beautiful. After 6 hours' good riding, our guides pointed out to us the formidable barrancas at some distance, and expressed their opinion that with great caution, our horses being very sure-footed, we might venture to pass them, by which means we should save 3 leagues, and be enabled to reach an hacienda within 6 leagues of the cave that night; and after some deliberation it was agreed that the attempt should be made. These barrancas, the word literally means a ravine or mountain gully, are 2 mountains, one behind the other, which it is necessary to cross by a narrow path that looks like a road for goats. We began the ascent in silence and some fear, one by one, till the horses were nearly perpendicular. It lasted about 20 minutes, and we then began to descend slowly, certainly not without some danger of being thrown over our horses' heads. However, we arrived in safety at the end of the first mountain, and this being accomplished, drew up to rest our horses and mules beside a beautiful clear stream, bordered by flowering trees. Here some clear-headed individual of the party proposed that we should open our hamper, containing cold chicken, hand eggs, sherry, etc., observing that it was time to be hungry. His suggestion was agreed to without a dissenting voice, and a napkin being spread under a shady tree, no time was lost in proving the truth of his observation. A very ingenious contrivance for making a wine glass by washing an eggshell in the stream is worthy of record. When we had demolished the cold chicken, the mozos surrounded the cold meat, and after gathering branches covered with beautiful flowers, with which we ornamented our horses' heads and our own hats, we prepared to ascend the second mountain. This is as steep, or nearly as steep as the first, but we were already confident in the sure-footedness of our horses, and even able to admire the view as we ascended single file. After much rain, this path must of course be completely impassable. The day had now become oppressively warm, though it was not later than 11 o'clock, and having passed the hills, we came to a dusty highroad, which, about 12, brought us to the hacienda of Miacatlan, belonging to the family of Perez Palacio. We were overtaken on the road by the eldest son of the proprietor, who cordially invited us in, and introduced us to the ladies of his family, and to his father, a fine noble-looking old gentleman. As we were excessively tired, hot, and dusty, we were very glad to spend a few hours here during the heat of the sun, and after joining the family at breakfast, consisting of the most extraordinary variety of excellent dishes, with a profusion of fine fruits and curious sweetmeats, amongst which was the ethereal-looking production called angel's hair, cabella de angel, we were glad to lie down and rest till 4 o'clock. This hacienda is very productive and valuable, and has a silver mine on it. There is also every variety of fine fruit, especially the largest cedrats I ever saw, which, although they have not a great deal of flavour, are very refreshing. With all their beauty and fertility, there is something very lonely in a residence on these estates, which are so entirely shut out of the world. Not so much for the proprietors themselves, who are occupied in the care of their interests, but for the female part of the family. We left this hospitable mansion about 4 o'clock, rested and refreshed, the proprietor giving K a horse of his instead of her own, which was tired. The sun was still powerful when we and our train remounted, but the evening had become delightfully cool by the time we had reached the beautiful village of San Francisco de